I would like to present the short story A Gap of Sky by Anna Hope. And what I'm going to go through is the narrative technique, the setting, and then the postmodern traits. So looking at the narrative techniques, what really pops into your mind when reading the story is that the language has a very high speed, both in action and in mind. Looking at the first quote here, she takes the glass, stumbles towards the little sink, fills it, and gulps the water down. Here we see a listing of actions that are done very quickly right after each other, which sets the pace of the story to a very high pace. Um, and if you look at the next one, fine, time, 10 minutes to get there. Shit, should she do the essay first? Print it in the morning? No, no time. We see that all her thoughts are going really, really fast. And here is an example of a stream of consciousness, which is seen various times in the story, and there's this mix between what's actually happening, the actual plot line, storyline, and then divided with her stream of consciousness thinking of what's happening right now. And what this really fast pace does to the story is that it becomes almost stressful for the reader to read it while it's going so fast. You almost feel the stress that she's feeling because she's in such a hurry. And then with the stream of consciousness comes the informality, because there's no time to edit what is being thought, because it's the thought right as it's there, which is why we end up with words like shit and no, no time. There's no time for editing anything. And besides making it easy to relate to her stress, what this fast pace creates is also that it reflects the main character's impulsive and very spontaneous way of living. And then going to the setting, the story is set in London, which is very typical for a postmodern short story or any story to be set in a big city. But despite being in a large city, the protagonist has a feeling of loneliness and the lack of social relations. And the reason for this may be found in the way that other people than herself are being described. They're described as just someone or person or people. And what this does is that it takes away the people surrounding her. It takes away their um their in what's it called? It takes away their identities, and they just become one in the many and the opposite of being unique. So it takes away their depth. So there are no people with depth surrounding her, which could maybe make her seem more lonely. And then what's also something that you can notice about the setting is that they're all the places that she goes to in the story are non-places, meaning that there are places that are going to be left alone. So here's an example of a non-place. It's a train station. People are only being there because they're waiting to get onto the train and then leaving. So she's going to all these different streets that are at a certain point of the time going to be abandoned in the night. And she goes to stores that are closing at some point. So they're essentially places with no real meaning to them, which is also very typical for postmodern stories. And then another place that I noticed that seemed very important was her connection to the river, the Thames in London. Um, she almost feels drawn to the river. You've seen this quote here. Maybe the river, yes, the river is what she needs. To look at the river, to see the wide river and wash this feeling clean. And the whole plot of this story is for the protagonist to go out and get this ink so that she can write her essay, which is about Virginia Woolf, or it's an essay about one of her Virginia Woolf stories. And since this is a postmodern text, there is almost always intertextuality, and here we see that through using Virginia Woolf. And she almost has resemblances to Virginia Woolf. As we know, Virginia, she commits suicide by drowning herself in a river. And here you could say that Virginia, she almost washes her feelings clean, or at least she's not going to have any more feelings after killing herself. So we see this resemblance to the protagonist who wants to clean herself in the river from her feelings. In this story here, the river almost does the exact opposite thing of what it does to Virginia Woolf, because it becomes a turning point for her. It's when she realizes that, oh, she's not going to die from the drugs after all, and she's not going to do drugs anymore. We don't know if the story is actually going to have the ending that we expect, that she's going to actually finish the essay. We don't know that, but we just know that it's a turning point for her, and she's not going to die after all. And here, if we look at one of the specific places that she mentions, Tottenham Court Road is just one of the many streets that she mentions. I found this photo, where we see typical postmodern architecture and these people walking around. And I looked at this quote: "There are people moving together here in this part of London, moving with purpose, with meaning." And Ellie is one of them. And this is where we see some of the irony that comes through postmodern texts. Because even though that the protagonist, she has meaning right now, she has to go get the ink, she has no meaning in her life whatsoever, because she's put in a position where it's her parents who actually want her to be this way. It's not herself, she has no meaning herself. And we don't know that the people around her has meaning either. So lastly, if we look at some of the other traits that we see from postmodernism, is this thing with anything goes. If we look back at the narrative technique, it is okay to just have a mismatch of the stream of consciousness and the real storyline. That's okay, because there's nothing that doesn't go. And then we have the question of existentialism, trying to find meaning in life, and then again the intertextuality with Virginia Woolf, and you can almost also link it to one of Virginia Woolf's stories, Mrs. Dalloway, because Mrs. Dalloway, she's going to get her flowers herself, and here we see her going out in the streets of London and getting the ink herself. So yeah, that was what I wanted to say about the story.